Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and while there was no race this weekend, we do have a pretty cool, different type of episode. That's because there's a rather large movie coming to theaters pretty soon that I think a lot of you care about quite a bit. That is, of course, F1 the movie. One of the biggest sports movies that it feels like has ever been made, and a movie that I think is being watched like a hawk from a lot of different groups of people. One group of those people are people like you, Formula One fans. And so I am pretty excited to tell you that I got a chance to see this movie early. Warner Brothers and Apple Original Films invited me to an early screening of F1 the movie. And so I've already seen the film and I have some pretty strong feelings across the board about it. In the interest of full disclosure, that was just a screening invite. I was not paid to attend the screening. I was not paid to make this review. And because of that, anything that you're going to hear me talk about today is really just my honest opinion about this film. However, I did obviously want to disclose that I was able to see this movie early because of that invitation, and I did not pay to go see this film. It was a free screening. Other than that, this review is not attached to the studio or attached to the film, and so we get to have a pretty honest discussion about how I felt about this movie and whether I think you would like it or not. As we go through this, I do want to tell you a little bit about my background that you may not know. Before I started making sports content on the internet, I worked in film and television. I went to film school, I have a degree in screenwriting, and I've worked on film sets and TV sets, as well as in something we call development. If you're not super familiar with the television industry, I worked in departments that we call development and current. Those two words are pretty specifically what they actually are. In development, we go through the process of what TV shows do before they actually become official TV shows that you hear about. We hear ideas from writers and producers, and those ideas are pitched and we buy the ones that we think are really good. And then we spend time kind of going through the process of developing that TV show from just an idea or a pilot script into a show that we think could actually do well on television. Some of those TV shows actually make it to air and some of them don't. And then the shows that do make it to air go into that department that we call current, which is working with the show on a day-to-day basis, making sure that that TV show as it's filming and being released is working well. So I've worked in departments like that across the board for TV shows like Greg Berlanti's You, Unreal. I interned at Cartoon Network and MTV for a bit, and I've also written on audio productions as well as video games. All of that is to say, I think a lot of your kind of reviews that you're going to see of this movie are going to come from two different camps. One camp is going to be F1 content creators or sports content creators in general that are looking at this movie just from the basis of accuracy, how it portrays the sport, and whether or not they think it's good for the sport as a whole. And then the other camp of people that you're most likely going to see reviews from are going to be film critics and film content creators. And that point of view is most likely going to come just strictly from the idea of being a film lover or a film critic, whether or not this is a good movie, whether or not it's good for movies. And all of those point of views are really great. But I personally sit right in the intersection of those two. So my review is going to be a little bit of a blend of both. I want to talk to you about how this film came together, a little bit about the background of the filmmakers of this movie, the process of making this film, and how a lot of that came together and what makes it so unique from a film perspective, how I feel this works as a movie on its own, and also whether or not I think you're the audience for this film. And then also from the sports side, I'm not only a fan of Formula One, but I've had the opportunity to work around a lot of these people, to work at racetracks, to make content in garages, to talk to drivers, and work with other series. So I think for me, this movie is a perfect intersection of what I'm really good at and what I'm really interested in. And hopefully, as I talk you through this review, you'll get a perfect blend of those two things, and I think hopefully a pretty unique perspective from me on this film. So all of that is to say, I have a lot of feelings about this movie, and I'm excited to take you down this road. I do recognize that not everybody will have had a chance to see this movie by the time I am talking about it, so I'm going to do my best to not actually actively spoil every part of this film, because at the top of this, I am going to say I do think this movie is worth seeing. I actually really like the movie and intend to see it more than once. So with that being said, I'm going to do my best not to spoil the movie so that you can enjoy it properly, but I am going to talk a lot about the film itself and a couple of plot points, and so if I am going to spoil something, I will give you a heads up so that you can skip ahead in the episode. So all of that being said, let's get into this. First and foremost, at the top of this, I just want to tell you that I really did like this movie. I think it's a very fun ride from the very first second that you sit in your seat all the way to the end of the movie. It is action-packed. The action is shot so well, and at points it successfully makes you feel like you are sitting in the driver's seat of a Formula One car. I think the actors across the board did a great job. I think the sound design itself really comes together in a way that it had to for this movie, and I also think in general this is a proper summer blockbuster. And while I do have a couple of critiques about the film that we will get into, this is absolutely a movie that I've not only seen and enjoyed, but already have plans to see again. If you are a summer blockbuster fan, this is a movie that will scratch that itch. And I want to talk a little bit about the team behind the film because I think that helps us understand how this all came together. First and foremost, this is a Jerry Bruckheimer production. Jerry Bruckheimer is responsible for not only a number of really good films and film franchises, but definitely movies that you are personally aware of like at some point in your childhood. The summer blockbuster is a genre that Jerry Bruckheimer not only definitely understands, but has been incredibly critically successful in for a number of decades. Film franchises that you can thank Jerry Bruckheimer for include the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, the Bad Boys movies, the National Treasure films, and of course, Top Gun. I say of course Top Gun because Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick play a pretty big role into how this movie came together, and that's because some of the creative team from Top Gun Maverick also are a part of this movie, F1 the movie. The director of F1 the movie also directed Top Gun Maverick, and one of the other things that we found out in the midst of all of this is that Lewis Hamilton was also offered a role in Top Gun Maverick, but ultimately didn't take it because he needed to focus on his preparations for the F1 season. And the director of Top Gun Maverick, Joseph Kosinski, is also the director of F1 the movie. As a whole, going into this movie before I saw it, I thought this was an interesting choice for a director and overall made sense because Top Gun Maverick does two really important things that they needed to do in F1 the movie for it to be successful. The first is that in Top Gun Maverick, because it was a Tom Cruise film, a lot of the stunts were filmed practically. So they took actors and they put them through training to be able to physically fly fighter jets and be able to film those scenes practically. There are actually a couple of scenes in Top Gun Maverick that are interesting to watch because since you have these actors trying to get through these G-forces of these actual kind of like stunt shots, there's actually a behind the scenes piece of footage where you can hear Miles Teller talk about the fact that he could never actually keep his head down the way he was supposed to in this film for a portion of the scene. He kept actually like hitting his head on the top of the glass in Top Gun Maverick. And it's because being able to train to sustain yourself against this amount of G-force is not something that you can just do in a couple of months. And so there's a scene where they actually keep that in, where he actually hits his head in a way that a fighter pilot would not, because they would have been able to keep themselves properly like against the G-forces with their neck. And again, I'm talking about this as a bit of a movie nerd, so a lot of that is stuff that I was interested in when I was talking about the kind of filmmaking of Top Gun Maverick in the first place. And if there's one thing that Tom Cruise has definitely become known for, it's doing his own stunts in a way that some people feel is a little too dangerous. In that we see him come into Top Gun Maverick, talk to Joseph Kosinski and to Jerry Bruckheimer about how they want to do these stunts, and get to this point where we're seeing them kind of train these actors to be able to fly fighter jets in a way that they don't necessarily have to in order to make a movie about fighter jet pilots, right? But it does add this layer of authenticity, this layer of kind of overall just, it's pretty cool. It's cool to hear that these actors got to go through like intense fighter jet training and actually learn how to fly fighter jets. They could have shot those scenes in a studio. They could have used a green screen and kind of CGI and made it look that way. But there's something more fun and something more authentic. It's something very cool and gritty about doing it that way. Also, something very expensive about doing it that way. Additionally, there was one other scene about Top Gun Maverick that really stuck out to me in my mind and also stuck out as a situation that I thought would be relevant for someone who's going to take on F1 the movie. And that was, if you've seen Top Gun Maverick, there's a scene where the jet kind of flies over a building and the roof blows off the building. In that scene, they were only able to shoot that one time because it literally destroyed the set. And that scene obviously was shot in a way that it was able to make the film and was something that was pretty high stakes and especially very expensive. And there was no chance to kind of do this again. I bring all of the practical elements of this up and all of the practical elements of Top Gun Maverick up because F1 the movie was shot very practically. And so I bring all of that up about Top Gun Maverick because when they announced Joe Kosinski was going to be the director of this film, that was something that stuck out to me as something that was really important for him to be able to do successfully. If you're a Formula One fan, you're probably already aware that they were shooting this movie at the track. Not just at the track and going to these tracks and utilizing them as sets, but actually traveling around the world with Formula One and filming during race weekends. This was something that meant that they had very limited time on track. This was something that also meant they were using real fans in the stands, and there were a lot of things that could go wrong there. And also something that meant that they had to do this properly, quickly, and successfully. And filmmaking in this way, in this very practical way, is sort of a dying art. We're not seeing it done as much because of how expensive it is, and also because people don't necessarily feel like they need to take the risk to do it this way. And you could go either way. You could feel like it's silly to risk actors and stuntmen in this way, to have them on track in these cars, that it's also expensive, that you're losing time, that you have to reshoot things, that traveling all over the world isn't necessary for this film. But I also kind of look at it in this way of like, why do people still go see the Mission Impossible movies after all this time? Why are people still seeing the Fast and the Furious films after all this time? It's because they are big. It's because they are blockbusters. It's because they are movies that feel like you can go to the theater and completely escape for a couple of hours, whether that's escaping the heat, whether that is going and escaping your life for a couple of hours. People go see Marvel movies, people go see action blockbuster franchises in this way because of things like that feel big, that feel really fun. And so seeing that they were going to do this was something that was really exciting to me in general, both as a fan and as a filmmaker, and also specifically as a Formula One fan, because I think that there is something that would have felt instantly inauthentic, I guess, to a Formula One fan fan watching a movie that had been shot entirely on a green screen with drivers sitting in like a half sim rig and kind of moving them around and putting the backgrounds in afterwards, you would have been able to tell. You would have definitely felt like you were watching an older film. Like, for example, if you ever watch Ocean's 11, which is one of my favorite movies, there is a scene where George Clooney and Brad Pitt are driving, and you can actively tell that they're literally just sitting on a green screen, kind of driving around, that the car is not moving, and definitely it's not moving because of the way that they're driving. This is something that happens a lot in film, and I actually, even though I have worked in it, don't know what causes this. So often you see actors who are driving that are moving the wheel so much more than you would physically move it, or they're moving it in like this harsh turn and then they're just changing lanes. All of those things, I think, are things that would have instantly turned Formula One fans off, and something that you would have seen if you didn't shoot this movie the way that they shot it. And then the second thing that I think Kosinski, the director, really was going to have a challenge with was something that he already tackled in Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick is a sequel to a movie that came out decades prior. And not only that, but it was a very beloved film. Top Gun is one of the most classic movies that when you ask people comes up as one of the movies that was so important to them. Top Gun is also a movie that led to a lot of people becoming pilots. And it's a piece of film history that you just like can't get away from. And so trying to make a sequel to a classic 80s film and make that sequel in 2022 with more modern cameras, more modern filmmaking, a more modern looking cast, and of course more modern films and storylines. One of the strongest issues they would have had kind of attacking that film is how do we take this old piece of IP and update it to an entirely new audience that may not be familiar with it? So people that would have been drawn to the theater by Glenn Powell and Miles Teller, a new generation of moviegoers, but also still respect the people that love this movie from the 80s. People who are either film buffs that really love classic films, or people who watched the movie in the first place. People who already have an attachment to this IP, to this idea, and make it in a way that people actually enjoy going to see the film and don't feel like they were robbed. Top Gun Maverick also accomplished that. And that was something that I think is pretty identical to the problem that they would have been presented with F1 the movie. As much as F1 is a global sport, it's also not a sport that everyone is super aware of, especially in American audiences. It is rapidly becoming a more popular sport here in America and worldwide in general, but F1 is something that is going to be new to a lot of people. A lot of people going to the theater, just picking something to see with their friends or for date night or with their family, are going to look at a summer blockbuster list and try to pick something, and a lot of people are going to end up in this theater that have never heard of Formula One. And of course, you have a global audience of F1 fans that are being very much marketed heavily this film. They've been watching it film at track, they've been watching people talk about it, they've been watching the drivers say that they have cameos, they've been seeing Brad Pitt around, and of course teams have been kind of around the filmmaking process as a whole. Lewis Hamilton is producing this film. It's a film that is going to also expect the F1 audience as a whole to come to the theater. And so that means that they not only have to draw a new audience and make this film feel exciting to them, and so it can't all just be an inside joke, but it also still has to have Easter eggs and respect the audience of F1 fans that are going to come, and hope that they will at least enjoy themselves, even if they're nitpicking at the accuracies of the film. And so that was something that, again, I was like, okay, I think that this director is someone who has accomplished these two major tasks in a demonstrable way with a producer who has very much already become known for doing this type of thing. And hopefully that means that those two big tasks are going to be successful in this film. So that obviously sort of takes us through like the top line background of this film in terms of who was there and why it was being made in the way that it was. I also think a couple of other big partners that are relevant to point out as to why I think this movie will actually be pretty successful. One, Lewis Hamilton was involved in producing the film, which was a very large marketing tool in my opinion. And we'll get into whether or not I think it actually helped with the accuracy of the film as a whole, but it also did have quite a number of fun cameos for anyone who's actually an F1 fan already. You get to see pretty much all of the drivers from last year's grid in this film. There are also some really fun kind of surprise cameos. Will Buxton is a big one, which he has personally announced that he's in the film, so I feel fine disclosing that. And then of course this movie is also produced by Apple Original Films, which I think we've already seen make marketing really cool for this movie. A couple of things that I thought were pretty cool so far. They released a haptic trailer, which means that if you watch it on your iPhone, you can actually feel the film in your hands. I know that sounds a little silly, but it's sort of like the vibrations make you feel like you are moving with the cars, sort of, if that makes sense. This would be easier if you would just watch the haptic trailer on your phone, then you would see what I'm talking about. They did a really cool thing where if you zoom in on the Monaco track on Apple Maps, you can see the F1 cars as well as an Apex GP car, as well as billboards for the movie itself kind of like set up around the track, which is really fun. You can also, I believe, get a discount on your movie ticket if you buy through Fandango with Apple Pay. So that's kind of fun. And if you have an Apple TV or an Apple product in general, I do feel like it is quite literally inescapable to actually see the trailer of this movie. And what's interesting to me about the rollout of this film with Apple in particular is that we've seen a lot of big movies go straight to streaming or to really push to streaming instead of going to the theaters. Netflix, Apple, and Disney Plus are kind of the biggest proponents of this. HBO Max as well has done a couple of things where movies that typically would have been big summer movie theater movies, summer blockbusters, if you will, actually just went straight to streaming. Or they were in theaters for a little bit and then they kind of spent most of their time trying to get you to watch it on Apple TV itself. This movie does not feel like that at all. It feels, in fact, like we are very much pushing everyone with every Apple device ever possible to go to the theater to see this movie. And I think that's really important because this is absolutely a movie made to be seen in theaters. This movie was shot for IMAX, which is how I saw it the first time, and it is a movie that is absolutely a theater experience. I do want to say, like, for me, going to see a movie in the movie theater is like one of the most human experiences that you can have. I feel very similarly about going to sporting events, whether that's a race or a game or anything like that. Being surrounded by people while you are watching a limited time thing that has especially a high action film or anything like that, but also just high emotional status. Like, you are at the edge of your seat for most of this movie. You are at the edge of your seat when you're watching a Formula One race. Everyone that is at a space that is in public, that is like a group experience, that is some of the best ways that we can connect with people. And I feel like after 2020, we don't do that as much. And it has been like a very slow push to get people back into the theater. Obviously, movies are also expensive. They are cost prohibitive, and people have gotten much more used to being able to kind of see everything at home on demand. And I totally get that, but I also feel like we have sort of lost the recipes in some way. So being in a movie theater that was completely full for this film, that meant that I was surrounded by people that were gasping at certain points. I took my dad and my little sister to this screening, and so they were also reacting, and seeing them react and kind of like hit you on the shoulder. And it's just such a fun experience. And at the end of this film, like, people clapped based off of who won races. And that, I think, is like one of the coolest things that you can do when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to going to see movies. A movie that makes you at the edge of your seat with like this desire for something specific to happen is incredible, but also a movie that can fill a theater and fill that theater with people who are engaged. That is something that is really hard to do, and something that a good summer blockbuster does. So does this check that box? Does it check this like community experience box? Absolutely. And also, I am just very happy to see the marketing push be go to the theater to see this film. Across the board, blockbusters have just not been the same thing that they used to be. And we are seeing a big push of people trying to get that back, desperately trying to get that back. And if you have AMC A-list, you can see 4 movies a week. And so, like, I think you have to see movies that make you want to go see them again. And I think F1 the movie is a movie that does that. So that was a really big thing for me. Like, the communal experience of being in the theater for this film, big thing. And so because of that, I want to talk about a big part of this film that I think is super, super successful. And that is the thing that forces you to see it in the theater. If this was a movie that did not do the driving sequences of this film or the technical aspects of filming this movie well, this would not be a movie that you had to see in theaters. But this is an action-packed film. One thing that I think is great that you can also tell from the trailers is that this is not just a movie that talks about F1 in a vacuum. This movie actually opens up at the 24 Hours of Daytona. And I think even F1 fans in general don't necessarily engage with a lot of other series, and that's a broad generalization. I think a lot of people watch IndyCar and endurance racing and other series as well. But in general, I think it's cool that a movie that is getting this much press and this much focus is also highlighting that there are other motorsport series that you could get involved in. And the 24 Hours of Daytona sequence, while it may not necessarily be the most accurate in terms of the racing and what would actually happen, is such a fun sequence to watch. Again, I think you feel like you're in the car here. I also think there are these little character moments that are really well done when you're getting introduced to Brad Pitt's character in this way. Brad Pitt plays a driver named Sonny Hayes, who is definitely at the end of his sort of tenure as a driver. But we open up watching Sonny Hayes at the 24 Hours of Daytona, where he is driving the graveyard shift, which is basically that chunk of time where most people are going to sleep and the drivers are just kind of expected to keep their pace. The 24 Hours of Daytona is in fact a 24-hour race that doesn't stop, and they do swap drivers out throughout the race. There are kind of legs that each driver runs. And so I think that there are these really cool moments actually that are done really well in terms of costuming, in terms of even product placement. Brad Pitt's character Sonny carries around these kind of AirPod Maxes throughout the entire film, and this is something that happens in Apple television and Apple original films, where we see this product placement that used to just be like Macs or iPhones, but now we're seeing like headphones, we're seeing AirPod Maxes, we're seeing whichever kind of product they want to push a little bit. But ironically, this worked really well for building Sonny's character for me, because frankly, the way he treats these very expensive headphones is low-key diabolical. He has stickers all over them them. At one point, he wears them in an ice bath, and I was like, those are very expensive to be that close to water. And also, he sleeps with them on at one point, and I also think that that kind of even informs the way that you look at this character in a really small way. You cannot sleep on your side with those headphones, so you have him like almost sprawled out in the sheets, just trying to get comfortable and sleeping as chaotically as he lives the rest of his life. This guy is living in his van, traveling the world in chase of one more race. And while that may not be the most accurate thing to the world of Cargo Fast, as you've heard me talk about before, I do think from a storytelling perspective, it instantly tells you everything you need to know about this guy. In terms of the tone of this film, I would tell you that it is like if Top Gun and Ocean's 11 had a baby, and if that baby was a Formula One driver that was way past his prime. There is bromance in this film in a way that is like super important to my personal taste. Brad Pitt and Javier Bardem kind of bring that together really, really well. Damson Idris and Brad Pitt also have a very good kind of back and forth relationship. I would say in that space, you can think more along the lines of like Linus and George Clooney's character, Danny Ocean in Ocean's 11. The humor of this film is pretty sharp and fun, and I think you really know these characters very well very quickly. This is a fun, high-stakes action film that does blur the lines of what actually would happen in this world, but also I think that is how things work when you're making a film about something, especially if you're making a film about something real that exists that people have opinions on. One of the other things that I did want to talk about specifically when it comes to the way that this movie is shot is that Apple actually created a camera entirely for this movie to be able to be shot. This camera was a special module that actually used an iPhone camera combined with an A-series chip, which is Apple's specific chip, that was then mounted on the side of these cars and used to kind of create footage throughout the entirety of a race, throughout the entirety of these race sequences. And it was built in a way that did not affect the aerodynamics of the car. And this is what I mean when I think like about Formula One and filmmaking as a whole, like these two things coming together to drive innovation. Formula One and motorsports in general come together, and we see like innovation that eventually makes its way to road cars. And then on the flip side, a company like Apple, a tech company, having to solve the problem of how we make race sequences feel legitimately real to audiences in a way that we also don't make these cars dangerous to drive, we don't affect the way that they're being able to be driven, comes together with them building this unique camera, coming with like pieces of a camera that they already have, that they've already invented for other things, and finding a way to like put them together in a way that actually works with the aerodynamics and the engineering of these F1 cars is just genuinely such a cool thing that comes out of this movie that will be used to make other sequences in other movies work really well, and could be used by F1 for better like actual filming of these races. Across the board, I think this is one of the cool places where we can see how engineering and filmmaking actually go together, and how the kind of idea and thought process of putting these things together works, how a technology specific space like Formula One or the engineering of an F1 car or aerodynamics or all of these things can create a problem for a creative industry like filmmaking that can then come together and solve something that then makes things better in the future. As you can tell, I'm a little excited about it. I get excited about cars and I get excited about movie, and I like when car and movie go fast together. Outside of the technical aspects of this film and outside of the kind of extreme funness of this film, the extreme enjoyment I had in the theater, and the absolute like nailed it summer blockbuster energy, one of the other things that I think this movie does do really well are the educational aspects. This movie, again, like I said, has to account for two very different audiences. One, an audience that for the very first time heard of Formula One when they saw the trailer for F1 the movie, and two, an audience of Formula One fans that are definitely coming in looking for things to nitpick. And so that brings us to this problem of exposition. There are a lot of things about the sport that need to be explained to an audience that don't know what's going on, and also need to be explained in a way that the audience that already does know what's going on doesn't get bored or annoyed. And also just in general, you never in a movie want to have someone turn to camera and say, just so you know, this is the way a Formula One race works. That's called bad exposition. And in an action film or an action genre, one of the coolest ways to do exposition is actually during the action. This is also true for other types of films. Like it's really done very well in The West Wing, where we have this concept of like walk and talks. If you've ever watched The West Wing or you've watched any political drama, you'll constantly hear exposition and things being explained in the political world to a basic audience, while two characters are walking from one room to another room with something very important that's on the other side of that end of walk. This happens a lot in the TV show Suits as well, where we are taking a language of a world that these characters have to know everything about, because it would be outrageous if a character in Suits asked another character in Suits about a basic law thing, because both of these people are supposed to be high-powered lawyers. The same way it would feel weird if a driver in F1 the movie asked another driver, how does the steering wheel work? That would feel weird because you have to believe that this character is about to get in this car and drive utilizing said steering wheel. But you still need to get that information out there. And so what F1 the movie does really well is utilize Will Buxton to do your Exposition. And I think this is particularly funny because Will Buxton has been sort of memeified in the F1 fan base because of the exposition that he provides in Drive to Survive and the way that he provides it. The way that he provides it in this movie is actually very smooth and helpful, I think. You also have commentators in general throughout race sequences explaining things, and you also do see like very quick versions of strategy meetings before races where they explain things like tire strategy, what tire strategy Apex GP, the team, is taking for this race. They do explain things like hard tires, soft tires, and medium tires. They also explain things like tire advantage, which I thought was really impressive. And they even managed to explain things that actually Drive to Survive doesn't explain. They actually get into formation laps, qualifying, and even some penalties in the race. So from an exposition and educational standpoint, I actually think it's pretty cool to see how much they were able to shove into this film without you feeling like you're reading a textbook about Formula One. And in a way that I don't even think would bother F1 fans that already know the information. For me, it was happening during race sequences or during sequences that were relevant to the plot, so it was interesting regardless. And also for me, I was like, how cool is this that if I brought someone that didn't understand anything about Formula One, they would have enough to be able to ask questions as well after the film. One of the series that I've done on YouTube in particular is covering F1 romance novels and sports romance novels in general about how much they would teach you about the sport after you finished it. And I think this movie actually teaches you quite a bit. I say that with the caveat that yes, a lot of stuff that happens in this movie would never happen in the world of Formula One. And some of that even extends to the actual reason why Brad Pitt is there in the first place, and the fact that he's as old as he is, and the fact that he would have driven in the 90s and now he's driving in 2025. Yes, there are things about this movie that are not accurate. And we'll get into what that means when we talk about the idea of drama versus documentary and whether or not this needed to be accurate. But from the very basics of just watching this 2.5 hour long film, I actually think you walk away understanding more about Formula One than you would have if you hadn't watched this movie. I think it does a really good job of explaining the basics and actually a couple things beyond the basics that you would generally expect someone to ask questions about. I've told people to watch Drive to Survive and just get interested in the sport, and then I'm happy to answer questions after that. And I actually think a number of things that they would be asking after Drive to Survive, after like 5 seasons of Drive to Survive, are answered in this film. And so that is actually a really cool and like accomplished thing in my opinion. That if someone comes into this movie with literally no knowledge of F1 as a sport, they would walk out and have questions that are relevant to strategy, that are relevant to the race itself, that are relevant to tire strategy, and maybe even relevant to the jobs that happen in Formula One. And that feels really, really cool. Now, without spoiling the film and without spoiling big turns in this movie, I do want to talk about one thing that I know a lot of people were asking and has been one of the biggest criticisms of the film as a whole, and that is how old Brad Pitt is. Not only is he old in terms of like his actual age, but the character himself is very old. And when I say very old, for anyone listening that's like over the age of 35, I'm not calling Brad Pitt himself old. I'm not calling anybody in their 50s or 60s old. I am saying that it is a little shocking and out of this realm that a 50 or 60-year-old person would be behind the wheel of a Formula One car. However, one of the biggest things is like, would this ever happen? No. I don't think the inciting incident of this film, of having Brad Pitt return to Formula One after having driven with like the era of drivers like Michael Schumacher and Senna, these are things that are referenced in the film that actually did happen. I don't think you're seeing that person come to the Formula One grid. However, I think something that's important to understand about movies in general is this concept of drama versus documentary. This is not a documentary film. This is not a film that is meant to take you through step by step a true story in Formula One. And I think also a lot of the F1 media that exists is something that is always either based off of a true story or is literally a documentary. And so I understand this kind of feeling that it should feel more true to real life, right? However, this is very much a fictional movie. This is a movie that is absolutely meant to be a dramatization of a fictional world that does actually exist in our current world. It's almost like when you watch a film that has like near reality fantasy, where almost like, oh, if I open the right door, I could find myself in like a vampire world. Like Twilight, for example, is near reality fantasy, where it's like, oh, if I just sit next to the right guy in biology, I could find out that vampires are real, even though this is my actual world. There are parts of this film that feel that way, right? Because you are literally in near reality because you're watching our actual grid, our real drivers and team principals that we're familiar with in scenes acting as themselves, with a team that, of course, does not feel like it would happen in real life. Brad Pitt, the 60-year-old Formula One driver, returns to the grid after a long time being away and having driven in the 90s. He's never actually driven a modern Formula One car until he starts his testing with the team, and then obviously he's able to do it very quickly. However, what it does do is give you an interesting story. I do think that people were looking for this movie to be very accurate to the world of Formula One and feel like a story that could happen tomorrow, but quite frankly, I don't know that that would have brought new audiences to this film. I don't know that that would have brought new audiences to Formula One either. I don't know that it had to be Brad Pitt, but I do think think it had to be a well-known movie star. I don't know that that movie star had to be old Hollywood, but frankly, the Hollywood system doesn't create movie stars in the way that it used to anymore. And so if you're trying to think off the top of your head who a major market movie star is that would have broad appeal to all different audiences, age groups, genders, as well as different kind of countries, there aren't a ton of people on that list. And a lot of those people are older than your average Formula One driver would be. We don't have 20-year-old absolute movie stars anymore. And that is not the fault of 20-year-olds or actors in general. It is the fault of the way our movie system has worked for so long. We have this sort of movie star era that big studios still want to have. You still want to have a bankable star in your film that not only brings in a big domestic box office, but is a bankable star that is well known in every kind of important space. That means in territories outside of the US. And so when you think of that, what they did with this movie was pick a movie star that is known all over the world, that does still bring audiences to the box office, though of course it's debatable as to whether or not he's still doing that, but also brings in a new young movie star whose career absolutely will be launched off of this film in a massive way. Damson Idris is not brand new to acting, but this is definitely the first time a number of people are hearing about him, and this movie will definitely launch him into being that guy that you're suddenly seeing in every movie in the next 3 years. I think we will see him in a rom-com. I think we will see him sign on to another big budget franchise quickly. I think you are going to see Damson everywhere after this film, because I do think that this movie is going to be pretty successful. And so with that being said, did this movie need to be about this comeback character? I actually, frankly, despite the fact that it wasn't like legitimately going to happen in real life, really enjoyed it, because that's kind of why I watch movies in the first place. Personally, for summer blockbusters, I don't sit there and think, oh, I really wish I could watch a movie that's exactly like what would happen in real life in real time. I like going to the movies in a way that it feels like escapism. I like going into movies that feel really big. I really like watching like Marvel movies. I like watching big blockbusters. So for me personally, I go to movies to feel that suspension of disbelief, which is absolutely required for this film, right? However, I also think that they do a pretty good job of it being relevant to the story that he is as old as he is. Not to spoil anything, these are things that you would know from the trailer or for the synopsis from the film. Brad Pitt's character is named Sonny Hayes. He used to drive in the 90s in Formula One and had a very bad crash that required him to stop driving. Loses his seat, disappears from the world of racing, and then sort of turns back up eventually driving in a different series every race, kind of trying to jump from space to space and hit every kind of item on his bucket list. Then his friend who he used to drive against has purchased a Formula One team that is failing, and he needs someone to come in and help him revitalize the brand. And so he gives Sonny Hayes, his old friend who is definitely too old to drive in Formula One, a return to Formula One for exactly 9 races. Now, personally, this was something that also my sister commented on, and my sister is not a huge Formula One fan, though she does know about it because I'm talking about it constantly. The 9 races part really makes it actually kind of allow you to make that suspension of disbelief. The idea of Sonny Hayes' character being able to travel for an entire Formula One season and race all of these races feels kind of ridiculous. It does also make the pace of this movie very quick. There are only 9 races that they're covering in this film, but the idea of Sonny Hayes kind of stringing it together for 9 races, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, actually, I think it's fine. Again, suspension of disbelief, which is something that happens in fiction. It's important. There are always going to be things in a 2.5-hour film that you don't do properly, right? You can't do everything space to space, fact to fact. And I think that's important to keep in mind. This idea that it is a drama, it is not a documentary. And if you're along for the ride and you're able to suspend your disbelief on certain things, I think it works. I also think that Brad being this old makes sense in the context of the movie. And I actually think they do a pretty good job of making it part of the plot in a way that's kind of fun. And Brad Pitt kind of does have a return to his old form of a blockbuster star. It does feel pretty fun, pretty cowboy-esque, pretty Brad Pitt. Now, in terms of the racing sequences, the plot, there are, again, things that wouldn't happen in the world of real Formula One that work really well for the story itself. It's very fun. It's very silly. There are points where you may laugh out loud, but entirely it comes together in a story that keeps you at the edge of your seat and I think is quite fun to watch. Is this for F1 fans or is this for new people? I think this is for people who enjoy movies. I think if you like going to a theater and having a good time for a couple of hours and just enjoying yourself and not taking things too seriously, this movie is very fun. I think if you love big action sequences, I think if you love kind of seeing the way that Formula One races are shot, feeling like you are actually in the cockpit instead of just watching the race happen, feeling like a passenger, which I think is something that is a really difficult thing to accomplish that this movie does accomplish, you will enjoy it. I think if you are the type of person that likes to find everything wrong with something just because you like to nitpick, this is probably not the movie for you. But I also think maybe movies aren't for you in general if that's like your taste. If you just want everything to be exactly 100% accurate, you should stick to documentaries or stick to real life. I think if you like enjoying storylines, if you like enjoying kind of having a good time, this is great. And also, if nitpicking does bring you joy, sure, maybe this is something that you'd like to complain about, I guess. this. I do think that this movie is well served for people who've never seen Formula One. I think it explains things really well, and I think it makes the world feel very fun in a way that is true to form. F1 is a high adrenaline sport, and that means the same for a driver or for someone watching it. You feel like your heart is going to explode watching an F1 race. This movie does a great job of portraying that. I also think that the actual sequences, again, I've harped on this in this review, but the sequences of actual driving in this movie are so well done. And so I think that if you're an F1 fan, that part, even if you don't like the movie itself, will be really wonderful to watch. And it is a lot of the movie. A lot of this movie is on track footage, and a lot of it is done very, very well. A lot of the sound design is done very well. I actually think that part is really important. The sound design of this film is quite well done because there's like this world where they could have just had the sounds of the car over and over and over again, and that would have become very jarring and overstimulating, I think, in an IMAX theater, in a Prime theater, in just a regular theater, or a space where you eventually are watching this movie on headphones. Just hearing the cars over and over, I think, would have eventually become exhausting. This movie does a really good job of blending in the sounds of racing along with kind of the sounds of a movie, and also having sound tracking and an enjoyable portion of this film. Another thing that I think actually they did really well, which may have been intentional or unintentional, is that a lot of the stuff that we saw shot in the actual sequences where we saw like podiums being shot at the different races, or we saw like Brad collapsing on track, or these different things. A lot of the sequences that fans were posting on TikTok and people felt like were spoilers. I'm not going to spoil the film itself, but a lot of that it literally doesn't happen in the movie. There's a ton of things that you think you know about this film that you will not know when you actually get through the movie itself. So I think that whether it was an intentional marketing ploy to get everyone to talk about it while they were filming the movie, or whether it was just that they cut so much out of this movie, which is what we're going to talk about next, it works in a way that they've been talking about this movie online for so long that you think you know everything about it, and when you go watch the movie, you really don't. And then let's talk about what they did cut about this film, and one of my biggest complaints about the movie. And again, I want to say a couple hundred times in this review, again, I really think this is a movie you should go see. I think it's very fun. I think it's a really fun space that I enjoyed, and it's 2.5 hours of my life that I really enjoyed and will repeat. However, there are always reasons to critique a film, and sometimes you have to talk about them. And one of the biggest critiques of this film that you're going to see, and that I am going to reiterate, is the treatment of women in this film. While a lot of people did see the sequence in the trailer where Brad Pitt's character kisses a woman who very clearly works for the team, a number of people assumed that that character was his engineer. She is actually the technical director of the team. And so while she is not directly his race engineer, she is in a senior position at this team, and it is very unprofessional to see that be the romantic storyline of this film. I also think one of the parts that this is a slight spoiler, but not really, it's just really a line about her kind of actual position at the team. I think highlighting heavily that she was the very first woman in Formula One history to be a technical director, and then making her the love interest that sleeps with someone that drives at her team, I really think we could have done without that, and I do think it just kind of overly does a little bit more than is necessary in the space. My secondary feelings about this are that the scene that this actually happens in could have been completely cut from the film and it wouldn't have mattered. Does not affect the plot of this film, does not affect the story of this movie in a way that is actually relevant. It doesn't even really affect their relationship in a way that would have been relevant to what they end up doing together in terms of the team and the plot of the film. I think that they could have still had their sort of chemistry. I think they could have kissed at the end of the film. I think they could have kind of had a will they, won't they throughout the movie, but I don't think they should have. Definitely they did it. We will 100% do it. I think that is kind of my feeling about it. I also feel like blockbusters are always going to have a storyline like this. I also feel like it is so little screen time of the film that I was able to kind of cut it out mostly from my feelings about the movie. And in this weird, nuanced way, I also think that Carrie Condon's character does get a lot more background than we typically get from a love interest in this type of film. A big summer blockbuster like Top Gun, for example, does not put a lot of intent behind the development of a female character. We do still somehow get this woman in Formula One who does have a whole role and have a lot to talk about, but at the same time, she does become the love interest in a way that it almost felt like they didn't have time to add another woman in to be the love interest, that they sort of just like shoved her in that role. I don't think it was necessary, and I do think they could have shoved someone else there or cut the romantic storyline entirely, and it does sort of not really mesh with the rest of the movie for me. I also think it's relevant to point out that Simone Ashley was definitely supposed to be in this movie in a large way, and like you have seen reported and like the director has said, her film role is cut down entirely to a cameo, and her credit is just Simone Ashley as herself. I think this is kind of a waste of an actress who's coming off of a massive kind of space with Bridgerton. I think she would have been really fun to see. I'm really curious what her storyline was. I am really curious if she was a character who was in a romantic relationship with Damson Idris's character, and if so, if that couldn't have filled the romance side of this plot that was necessary to a summer blockbuster. So I would be remiss not to say that I didn't like that part of the movie and that I don't think it was relevant for the film itself, and that I think cutting out Simone Ashley, while I'm sure there was reason to, and while the movie is quite long, is kind of a loss of an audience that would have been relevant, that we also unfortunately saw Jerry Bruckheimer comment that he doesn't necessarily think is the audience. I think bringing young women to the theater to see Simone Ashley in this movie would have been relevant, because as we know, the female audience of Formula One is huge. We make up about 46% of the audience as of last year, I believe. And so bringing more young women to the theater that were fans of Simone Ashley because of Bridgerton could have been an opportunity to bring an entire generation of women in a different way to the sport of Formula One. And so I think cutting her out in this way kind of sucks. I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it's something that would have brought people to the box office. And in general, I'm quite curious what her storyline would have added to the film, especially because it feels like Carrie Condon's character has to fill this space that objectively she shouldn't have had to, or there should have been another character there. It kind of goes without saying that this movie does not pass the Bechdel test. If you're not familiar with the Bechdel test, two women must speak to each other in a film about something other than a man. That never happens in this movie. I don't think two women ever speak to each other in this film, which is disappointing, but not surprising, and not necessarily why a lot of people are going to go see this movie, as unfortunate as it is. But also the only other kind of female character we see in this space is a tire gunner, and we see her be the one that is sort of incapable at the beginning. Brad Pitt defends her, and then there's also this scene where it feels like someone really understood the assignment of being a woman in this space, where she actually stands up for herself and says, like, please don't stand up for me again because it makes it look like I need help. And then that's fully undercut by the rest of the way women are treated in this film. The other thing I will say about the female representation in this film is that it's sort of this weird mixed bag, because in slightly spoiler territory, but again, not really spoiler territory because you see this in the trailer, Carrie Condon's character could be this really interesting female character if you cut out literally 2 scenes of this movie. I think you could have a character who you know quite a bit about how she becomes an engineer, why she thinks engineering is interesting. You get this interesting twist of the fact that she is a technical director and that she's the first woman to ever do so. You get to listen to her talk about engineering in a cool way. She's also a bit of a composite character because we do see her talk about team strategy, tire strategy, run different meetings that she wouldn't be running as the technical director. But this happens in a ton of movies, especially movies that are kind of based on real life. We don't have enough time, like in terms of the screen time and the runtime of the movie and the script itself, to have an individual character for every person on a team because there are so many people on a Formula One team. But this is also applied to like real life scenarios where essentially what we do in filmmaking is we take a character that is going to encompass a number of other characters. And so in real life, this person's job would be done by like 6 other people. But in the movie, we only have time to introduce you to this one character, make you care about this one character. And so we have that one character do all these different jobs. This is something that happens in storytelling all the time. And so it is interesting that Carrie Condon's character here becomes that sort of composite character and does have a lot of say in how the team is run, how the car is built, and how the team is making strategy calls. And so if you were to cut out the romance subplot, or even leave in some of the romance subplot in terms of her flirting with this character and being able to get him to do what she wants him to do, utilizing sort of that bond or that interest to be able to move the team forward, there were a lot of different ways that I think it just could have been a little bit more interesting than it ended up being. And so I actually have kind of complicated feelings about this, because when we're talking about her character in this position outside of the romance subplot, I actually think it was kind of cool and a slightly interesting different take than we usually see in an ensemble blockbuster like this, to see a woman in a position of power to some degree. Because if you compare her character to sort of like the Top Gun female characters, or you compare her character to like Black Widow in the original Avengers films, Scarlett Johansson is introduced in Iron Man 2, but throughout most of the franchise, we really only see her character in relation to the men that she works with. We don't really learn a ton about her, and it takes all the way until we actually see her get her own film in Black Widow that we really learn anything about her past, her history, or anything like that. And so we have the only female character in this entire ensemble film that goes through an entire franchise where we don't see a lot of her own personal motivations, and she also doesn't get her own sort of storyline outside of the way she relates to men in any sort of real way until essentially her character has already been removed from the franchise as that phase is sort of leaving. I use that as an example to compare to this because Carrie Condon's character is not the main character of this film. And we already knew going in that it was not a female-led film, but there was a woman billed high enough that she's on the poster and her name is on the poster. And so again, I have this mixed bag because you get to see a woman in an engineering position, you get to learn enough about her that she is kind of an interesting character, and then a lot of that is undercut by sort of that romance subplot and one specific line in the movie that I don't want to spoil, but did sort of take me out of it for a moment. So my complicated feelings on it are, if they had cut out about 10 minutes of this movie max, I actually think it would have been pretty cool to see her in this role, and I think she's actually a really great actress in it. And as a whole, for female representation in this film, I guess objectively, I was already expecting the romance subplot, and it was not as bad as I expected it to be. And because of that, maybe it didn't bother me as much as I was expecting it to, though it is definitely the weak point of this film for me personally. I do think that it's ignorable and it's still an enjoyable film outside of this, but I didn't want to not explain this or talk about it because it is a talking point that I think is going to become a large point of this film, the reaction to it, and something that I do think could have been objectively done better. Though, to be fair, it is really one of my only complaints about this movie. I think if you're looking for a movie that is entirely accurate to Formula One, probably not the movie for you. But I also think if you look at other movies that have been made about Formula One, nothing's ever been 100% accurate. And this is actually a fun version of it where it is completely fictional. Most of the Formula One movies or TV shows that have been made in recent times have been based off of real stories that have happened. And this one is entirely fictional, and I actually think that's really cool. And I think we'll kind of get more of that moving forward, I hope at least. We're seeing Drive to Survive, we're seeing F1 The Academy, we're now seeing F1 the movie, based off of the success of this film that I really honestly do expect it to have because it is 100% a very successful blockbuster at that formula. I think the early reviews essentially tell you that you're going to have a good summer splash at the box office when you go to see this movie. I think the amount of marketing money that's been put behind it, especially looking at how many screens this movie takes over on Thursday, I overall think that people are going to go see this movie, and I think the reviews, generally speaking, are going to be positive. I do think that Formula One fans are going to complain, and Formula One journalists most likely will complain about a lot of the inaccuracies, but I also think that the inaccuracies are the type of inaccuracies that if you're going to go see a movie and enjoy yourself, they won't kind of take you entirely out of the film. The other thing that I think is actually pretty cool that I want to talk about is that there are a lot of Easter eggs for Formula One fans themselves in this movie. First of all, this movie actually was, like we talked about earlier, filmed on Formula One tracks at Formula One race weekends with Formula One drivers and staff surrounding them. You will see some of your favorite drivers get cameos. You will see a couple of team principals actually get speaking roles in this film, and I have a personal favorite cameo that I will not spoil because I think it's pretty fun. You're also going to see some of your favorite Formula One drivers become characters in the racing of this film. I think that is really fun as well. And I also think one of the other things that's pretty cool about this movie is there are points in this storyline where you can kind of feel what they're referencing in Formula One history. There are moments on the racetrack that are relevant to the storyline that will feel like, oh, I've seen that before. And it's because it really does feel like it's heavily referencing a real racing moment that happened or a real racing incident. And because of that, I actually think it's pretty fun. They never explicitly say what year it is, though obviously because it is last year's grid, it feels like it's last season. And obviously because there are two other drivers on the grid and there are other things happening, it's not exactly like what happened last season. But I actually think it's really fun to see these drivers on these specific tracks that you're already familiar with. I think that bringing in the politics and the business of Formula One and some of this idea of sort of corporate backstabbing and also kind of this down on your luck driver, pure sports fan battling against the kind of corporate sponsors and the money that they need, and the idea of this sort of romantic energy and bromance being the only thing that can save this Formula One team. I think all of that feels really fun, and also I think the energy in these characters feel very real. I think you feel the pressure behind Damson Idris's character, Joshua Pierce, and his feeling of being a rookie that doesn't know if his team's going to exist anymore. I also felt like some of this team energy was referencing sort of the energy of Braun GP, this desire to make this team work, the idea of a team being run by people who really love the sport and desperately want to see everyone's job stay, this sort of desperation to keep the team alive, and this sort of unconventional response to the team as a whole, and this sort of unconventional response of how to save the team. It's not anything like the Braun GP story, it just feels like it holds the same heart in some ways. I do think that this movie feels like it was made by people who maybe didn't love the sport before they started, but absolutely spent the time around the sport to try to understand the energy and the feeling behind it and the passion behind the fans and the drivers and the people who make this team possible. I think that there's something really cool about that, and I do think you can feel that on screen. And again, I do think that the critiques of this film are going to come from this idea of documentary versus drama and how accurate it needs to be. But my biggest thing about this movie that I think will be successful is that this movie, if you take someone who has never heard of Formula One to it, they can watch this movie, leave the theater, and go, holy crap, that feels so fun, and I think, yes, I would watch a race with you. I think they do a good job of kind of capturing the energy of being at a race and the excitement of the sport. I think that they do a great job of trying to put as much exposition about the sport itself into the movie without feeling like you're reading a textbook or listening to a lesson. As someone who tries to be as educational as possible in my content, one thing I was worried about in this movie was that it would either lean too far into trying to explain everything or it it wouldn't explain enough for an audience that didn't know what Formula One was. But having gone to this movie and having heard responses from people who've never known anything about Formula One and going in also knowing about Formula One myself and bringing people to this movie that are aware of Formula One, I think it strikes a very good balance of exciting people that have never heard of Formula One to consider watching the sport for the first time, which is something that I do think is important and also a stated goal of this film. And I think it also manages to keep it very much in the action, so if you already know the answers, it doesn't bother you in a weird way. I think this movie absolutely accomplishes being a massive summer blockbuster that will bring people to the theater, and I do think that there are some missed opportunities with Carrie Condon's character and with the use of Simone Ashley. But I don't know what the original kind of version of this film was. I don't know what the original script was. I don't know what her part was. But I do think that there are things that probably could have been cut to keep at least some of her storyline in, and I do think that losing her as a marketing piece really feels like a loss. In general, I think that this movie is worth seeing. I know that I am definitely going to go see it again. I already have plans to see it again. I already have friends who've asked if I would go see it with them as well. Friends who have no interest in Formula One but have seen the trailer and know that I care about it have asked me to go to the theater with them, which is a great sign. In general, I think this movie is going to do two really big important things. One, I think it's going to be a very fun summer blockbuster, and I think it has built this new kind of innovation to how we can shoot movies like this and how we could have more Formula One movies that feel this authentic when it comes to the actual racing and on-track action. And two, I do think that this is going to expand the audience of Formula One as a whole, and I think that that is a good thing. I think especially for American audiences and for young audiences, this is going to be a big splash. I do think that there are a couple of things that could have made it a bigger splash, which I've covered in this, and hopefully I've covered enough of this that you have been able to make an informed decision for yourself. If you are the type of person that a single inaccuracy bothers you, this may not be the movie for you. If you're the kind of person that just wants to go in and enjoy yourself and can do so, then this is a great movie for you. I would recommend seeing this in IMAX if you have the ability to do so. It was shot for IMAX and it feels like it was shot for IMAX, and it feels incredibly immersive in that space. If you can't see it in IMAX, any of the other kind of premium formats I also think are worthwhile, and if not, I still think it's worthwhile seeing it in the theater as a whole. As long as you get to experience this in a theater with the big screen, with surround sound, and with an audience, most importantly. I think you will have a lot of fun. I think you'll probably have a couple of complaints, but I think overall, F1 the movie highly exceeded my expectations, and I actually think the expectations were pretty low for this film from the Formula One fan base, and so I think it'll exceed a lot of people's expectations. I do think I've already covered the caveats that you should be aware of before you head in, just so that you can enjoy yourself, but I'm curious for you, as you start seeing this movie, if you've already seen it at some of the advanced fan screenings, how did you feel about it? Do you feel like the action sequences are as good as they felt like to me? Do you feel like immersive action sequences like this are important? Do you think that like innovation in general is very exciting? How did you feel about the way women were portrayed in this film? Would you go see this movie again? And are you heading to the theaters to see it for the first time? Also, I'm curious for you how you felt about the cameos of real life people from this sport, because I was kind of worried it was going to pull me out of the film knowing that it was going to be there, but it actually really didn't. It just felt like a fun Easter egg for myself, and that I think a lot of people are going to feel fine about it if they don't know who these drivers are, because they're not really large portions of the film. But for you, did it pull you out to like be aware that we were at a race that this driver won, but now we're seeing a different situation? Did it feel like they should have just gone with a completely fictional grid in your opinion? Or did it feel like it brought a level of authenticity to the experience and just sort of a fun nod to the people who were already Formula One fans? If you're a Formula One fan, did you like the movie? If you're not a Formula One fan, did this movie make you feel like you should try Formula One? Did you learn anything? Did you feel like the explanations were good? I would love to know your opinion on all of those things that I've just spent all of this episode talking about. So if you're watching this episode on YouTube, please leave your feelings in the comments section down below. If you're not watching this podcast on YouTube, head over to YouTube and leave your opinions there. And of course, you can always find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kumari. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Snapchat, Facebook, you name it. You can find me in all of those places. You can also always join the Grid Chat server where we talk about these types of things. We also watch the races live and send in questions. And during our race recap episodes that happen every race weekend, I also answer your questions from the race or any other things that you might have about the race weekend in general. And we also share our hot takes and predictions from the race and the race for next week. So you can do all of that by joining the Discord in the episode description down below. There's a link. And you can also always send in your questions, comments, and hot takes through my Instagram stories, which again is at Marissa Kumari. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether this is YouTube or a podcast app. That way you don't miss any episodes of this podcast. And of course, I do hope you head to F1 the movie this week and that I get to hear what you thought about it. As always, thank you for listening to Grid Chat, and I will see you next for the Austrian Grand Prix recap.